It's another episode of ClarisTalk AI. Hello, Cris.
Hello.
We have a special guest today. It's Ronnie Rios
Oh
from
my
Claris.
God.
Welcome.
Hello, everyone.
Hey,
It's
Ronnie.
I'm
really excited to be here, man. This is really
I'm
great.
really
Get to
glad you're
talk
here.
about, yeah, me too. Get to
Yeah,
talk
anything?
about my two favorite subjects, FileMaker and
Yeah,
AI. This is going to be awesome. It's going to be a lot of
for
fun.
sure.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
Anything big happened 3 days ago?
I don't know. I can't think of anything.
Hmm.
New
Let's
episodes of my
see.
favorite show. I don't know.
Let's not keep people
Yep.
in suspense. FileMaker
Uh,
2024. I
Woohoo.
think I added a 20 in there. Shipped 3 days ago. Exciting. Bunch of new AI features. I'm here in Berlin at the .fmp conference, seeing a bunch of cool sessions about it. But I would really love it, Ronnie, if you could take over and show us some cool stuff. Talk about what you've got to talk about with the new version.
Yep,
And I
absolutely.
think the reason Ronnie's here, and Ronnie, you want to talk a little bit about your role in bringing these things to market, I think will kind of
Hmm.
frame things up nicely for everybody.
Sure. Be fantastic. So Chris knows I've been working with AI. It's been kind of my little passion on the side for quite some time, and we've been, you know, everything from core ML to just about anything that will come my way. But obviously with generative AI a couple of years ago, right, we started fooling around with some of the things that it really enables you to do. So I've been playing around and trying really to figure out how to bring it into FileMaker. What's the best way of enabling, bringing value to the end user, right? As a developer, bringing generative AI. And some of the things I've been playing around with for quite some time, I was able to show off some of those things at Engage. So Engage,
Yeah,
we
that's
did,
you did
I
actually
had,
an excellent job. And actually, you were representing Claris there as product manager, if I'm not mistaken, on the AI stuff. I know your role was
yeah,
influential. I just don't know what they call that over at Claris these days. And you did
yeah.
the hit of the Claris Engage conference. You were at the time, though, not talking about FileMaker 2024 stuff, were you? You were doing what was at the time in market. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. So my session at Engage was really about showing how to bring AI and kind of more focusing on generative AI because that's what everybody's really looking at right now. Is how do you bring that? How do you power features for your end users with generative AI?
So
Because
you're
a lot of
talking about
people,
like writing poems and stuff like that, and
Hmm.
and
yeah, because
asking
that's
and
right.
question answer machine stuff, right? The really
Yeah,
Yeah.
question
important.
answer. Yeah,
Anything at
those
zero
kind of
shot
things.
is good.
Yeah, anything that's zero shot, right? Yeah, Chris and I have always been joking, like, well, people just, yeah, these bots are great for generating poems and stuff like that, but really, what can it do for my end users? How do I bring AI-powered features to my end user? How do I bring value to them through AI? And so I've been, trying to do that, playing around with it for a while. And so my session at Engage was really about showing some of those use cases, some of the things that I've been playing around with, some of the things that I think that people can start using again with the in-market version of FileMaker, what was in market at the time, right? FileMaker 2023, and how to enable those features using AI. So we had a whole session where we go through some of the concepts and showing some of the use cases there. And I think people liked it. I think it was a lot of fun for sure.
Huge hit, huge hit.
Uh,
I
You want
loved
to
it
show us
for
some stuff?
myself
What are
too.
we starting with?
Yeah.
uh, sure, I can share something from it. Actually, let
Yeah, so
me
we'll go into the Wayback Machine to
the
look at some of
Wayback
the stuff that
Machine.
Ronnie was talking about, and which will help frame up why the stuff that came out this week is so so important and compelling. So,
Yeah,
um, ooh,
yeah. I
smart
think one of the
dashboard.
Yeah, I think this one of the one of the features I showed about 4 or 5 different use cases, and one of the ones that really kind of got people excited because I also teased it during the keynote was about called the smart dashboard. It's really how do you generate charts in FileMaker using AI? Um, I was explaining during the keynote that one of the things that I've almost always have had to do, right, is build some sort of chart in every application that I've built. Right, there's some sort of report and usually some sort of charts, some sort of dashboard there is. And the problem with charts is that, as almost everything that we build as a developer, is that it's going to be fixed in place for a while. Right, whatever we build, we kind of have to predict what the user is going to be asking, how they're going to use it, and that's almost impossible, especially when it comes to reports and dashboards because they're used by decision makers. And I don't know how they're going to want to manipulate the data in order to answer whatever challenges they're having that day. And so to me, charts was just kind of like that really good use case where the idea here was to use AI to generate charts. So behind the scenes, really what it does, it's the scripts and with the APIs, it's really generating SQL statements behind the scenes. So you provide a description of what it is that you want, you pass that along with the schema of the entire database. And so the LLM just generates some SQL. In my particular case, there's no data exchange. Like there is none of your data gets sent to the LLM. And not saying that's just a bad thing in of itself, but it does make it a lot faster. If I don't have to pass along my entire table or the results of the SQL, it's going to make it a lot faster.
Well,
and so
actually, Ronnie, double click on that a little bit. Like, I don't mean literally, but like that's actually kind of a huge deal, especially if people are concerned about data privacy, right?
Yeah.
And that was one of the things I really was impressed with on your demo. So first of all, you're using SQL as your retrieval mechanism. We've talked before how you can do vector database searches, or you can even do API calls.
API calls, yeah.
You chose to do SQL over DAPI, for example, which we've had some conversations about, and I thought was really interesting, your decision-making process there. And then did that also help you facilitate not actually sending the data over to the language model, or were those independent?
So the reason why I chose SQL, and I've heard some people say, well, why did you choose SQL? Because it's not that efficient, especially in FileMaker. But there is just the easy answer is almost every large language model knows SQL. SQL has been around for so long. There's so much data. Part of the training data is SQL that almost every large language model knows SQL. So I didn't have to train it. I didn't have to provide it content. It's fairly straightforward to generate, and it's really, really good at it. Like most models are fairly good at doing that. Some of them better than the others, but it's just an easy way out. You could have done API, and as a matter of fact, I had Mike Wallace walk up to me at Engage and showed me how he had a large language model generating calls to DAPI, which is fantastic, right? Again, this is just one way of doing it. It was not meant to be showing what's the right way, but showing that it is possible to do these things, which I think was important to do.
Yeah, I think the thing with DAPI, because that's what we use in our intuition platform when we're communicating with FileMaker, is, and you know, I've talked about this before, but it's the context part of it, right? It's you're communicating then through an API in the same manner as you would have done with CWP or something like that in the past. It's through a layout to provide context into the data. So rather than, and actually the TOGs might come into play as well too, as far as context and related data.
One other. I want to see what this does. I'm dying to see what's going on.
Well, okay. But the point is he's using SQL here, and the really important part of it is that there's no data exchange. So you want to talk about why that is and why that's important, because I see the terms in the Claris messaging, by the way, all over the website about responsible, and that's actually a big thing to bite off if you're going to say that your AI is responsible. So I think this is maybe one of the ways that Claris is indicating that using these tools is a responsible way to do it. So if you want to expound upon that a little.
Yeah. So again, this example sends no data whatsoever, because all I'm getting back from the large language model is the configuration of the chart. I'm getting the SQL itself and how the chart is going to be configured. What the data is, as far as a large language model is concerned, really is irrelevant. And so I can, could separate the two things, right? The construction of the chart and the data. And so no data really needs to be sent over. This gives me a great advantage, right? Obviously with privacy and security. So I do not have to send over that. The only thing I'm really sending that might be considered for some people a little sensitive would be the schema, right? But that's a decision. But nothing else is being sent over. The other reason about that also is it makes the inference a lot faster. The less data I'm sending, especially the less data I'm generating, is going to make it a lot faster
and less expensive too, because you're not taking on token costs too.
Absolutely. So just by separating those two things, it just made a huge difference. So I tried to do that, make it faster, make it private by design. So because of those things, like it's really fast. Like it's almost magically fast. So I'll show this really quickly. This is kind of what I showed during the session. So I have this little dashboard that I created for my users, and there's already a list of widgets. Right? I'm calling them widgets. These are charts and indicators that the user can use and place them in some of these one of these 5 places that I have here. But if they want to generate one, they click on the plus sign, they choose what type of widget they want, maybe an indicator, and they type what it is that they want. They really describe what it is. So in this case, sales cycle length. They click on the button, and that information, right, this description, along with the schema and some other things, get sent over. And what I get back is the SQL query that's going to be required to get the data that I need, and just a JSON object that describes how this data is going to be manipulated, how it's going to be presented. And so I can make changes over here. I can say, hey, this is going to be a number, and then I can do all that processing, all the formatting here locally in FileMaker. And once that's there, then, right, the sky's the limit, what I can do with this. All of this is all native FileMaker stuff. There's no plugins, no JavaScript, there's no crazy stuff up here. This is all FileMaker stuff.
So for those that are listening, we are looking at FileMaker charts, yes?
Yeah, this is all FileMaker charts.
So, and just to kind of, I think that's a really important point here, because those are probably one of the more difficult things to configure and use inside the FileMaker UI. And you have managed to use Gen AI to make that more approachable. So approachable that users who may not even work for the company that's going to be using the system that you're building this for, they get onboarded years to come. They will just be able to interact with this and get exactly what they need, right? Like that's, I think, the really interesting part of this is how dynamic this interface is.
Yeah, it's extremely dynamic. Again, once they configure these, these widgets, which again, they're just records here in the database. You can just present them in whichever way you want. There's nothing fancy about this. Again, these are all native FileMaker tools and objects. We've got some slide panels and some stuff in here, but it's all native FileMaker charts and objects over here, just used in a particular way so that it makes it very easy and very flexible. And the last part here I'm showing here is that because I'm using SQL, which is another advantage of SQL, is that it is not dependent on my relationship graph. And so I do not have any of the constraints of context that is brought to by the relationship graph, which does happen with DAPI, for example.
Yeah.
And so what this flexibility allows the user to ask for anything that they want, because they might see connections later on that we didn't foresee, or that we maybe we didn't represent it in the most efficient way in the graph. And so, I brought this up here and I showed here what I'm showing here is the relationship graph. You can see that the data tables are actually not even part of it. There's no relationship between them in FileMaker. They're just standalone tables right now. But because it's SQL, right, all those relationships get created on the fly. This still works, which is really cool.
It's a huge advantage. And just a little bit of commentary on how you're not sending the data to LLMs. And the reason I keep bringing that up is because the traditional RAG or retrieval augmented generation is literally about sending your data to the LLMs. And that, I think, what the interesting thing about this approach is that you're not.
Yeah, there's nothing here, again, no data other than the schema is being sent. Because I think this is one of the concepts that, as a developer, I've been looking at generative AI is as a kind of as a logic engine. So here it is really all it is doing is helping bridge that gap. It is here as doing a function. It's not manipulating the data. It's not looking at the data. It is something as a programming language, if you will, because when I'm programming it, when I'm asking it, is in plain English, but it's sending back a result in a fixed way that I want. So it's really there as a logic engine, right? Something that would normally require a human being to write out, right? It is doing for me.
Right, yeah, which would take a lot of effort, right? I mean, but the other thing that occurs to me is this could apply to other than just like built-in FileMaker charts, but I work a lot with Google Charts. And I don't know if that would work like with the SQL query, but you can just give it a variable data. You can give it you can have it build HTML with CSS or something and have it build that in your application as well. Then you get all the other chart types.
Absolutely. I actually have a version of this similar to this using Chart.js, which I love. It's really easy and it does the exact same thing. And by the way, it's not really writing JSON. It's not writing JavaScript. It's not writing HTML. It is just giving a JSON object with the configuration. My JavaScript takes that, interprets it, and creates the chart on the fly.
Yeah, that would be local too, right?
It's just a logic, completely.
Yeah,
local.
like if you use Google Charts, you're just still sending your data out. But yeah, with if you're running it your way. So yeah, let's take a look. Can we see some more examples of this? I guess we saw a couple a minute ago.
Yeah. So this here is just showing kind of the scripts. I can see the scripts behind the scene is just really, really easy. It's really small. There's a main script here, generates the SQL and the settings, and then everything gets run locally. So the entire query gets run on your machine. And that's why it's really that fast. There's
Hmm.
it is very, very fast, which is really nice.
And just for some clarity, this was the before this week release of scripts. We're going to talk in a moment about
Great.
some of the new tools that are at your disposal, but just to really drive the point home, all of this was possible even before the big announcement this week. And I think the real takeaway there is that people, there's nothing to wait. There's no reason to be waiting to try to integrate these features into your solutions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can start using those things today. And this and the other files that I use during the session are available on community. So you go into community .claris.com, look for the session, be able to download the slides as well that I use during the session, and just take these files apart, look inside, see what makes it tick, modify it, learn from it. I really, really would love people to look at this, learn it, and iterate on it, make it better. We've had already some people do that. We had Nicholas the other day. He took the find example and made it into an add-on. This was fantastic. I just love when people take stuff and
yeah, you're talking about the Claris Community live stream, episode number 1, where the feature was taking one of those files, like you said, and they did a great discussion on talking about that. By the way, the next one was one that we'll put the link in the show notes, but it was one that I did with Rosemary on basic prompting principles, which I would encourage people to go check out. And then, by the way, there is one coming after that too, right? At some point over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, we're looking to have it. We'll have the link out soon. We'll have another live stream. We're looking at July 11th. It will be just about AI. So we'll have some people over and we'll have a conversation about some of the new features, some of the things that we're going to be talking about here today, but more from a developer's perspective, right? We want to hear from the community how they're using it. How are you guys using it? What do you see? What's exciting about it for you? It should be great. Really, really good.
Fantastic. Great resource. Looking forward to that. And so you're showing us now how you've integrated into a dashboard. And by the way, Matt loves dashboards. He's a huge fan of dashboards. And so we're actually seeing FileMaker charts interactively and mixed maybe with some other charts. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. So here you can see all the different, again, it's the dashboard. You can see all the different widgets. When you create a new widget here, just another record, you can choose a type. What I showed earlier before was an indicator, but here's a chart. Like this is a pie chart. I'm asking it to create a pie chart that shows the count of opportunities for each deal in the stage. When you click on the button, and that you see the chart appears in the back. And that's literally, this is real time. This is not, there's no fast forwarding, no editing. That's how long really it took to generate that chart. But once again, it's not sending all the data. It's not sending any of the data over. It's just sending some configuration, and all you're getting back is that little JSON object. And then all the query gets run locally. The cool thing about that is that then these charts can always run. It's not static data. And so because it's a query, right, these charts will always be live, which is just great.
And technically, different users can get different experiences as far as the visualization of their data as well, potentially even based on job roles or the data they have access to. And it's something that developers don't have to think about deterministically in advance, right? So I think the era of deterministic coding, meaning we have to try to capture all the possible use cases weeks, potentially years in advance of actual users engaging with our applications, might be behind us. Ronnie, philosophically, your thoughts on that?
I hope that a lot of that can move away. I see, especially generative AI as a developer, right? I see it as an amazing tool to be used as a kind of a logic engine, right? Where it can do things that would normally require some human reasoning, and I can shift those things away, but build that into the application and take away some of the things that I would normally have to think ahead way too much, try to predict how the user is going to use it, and just give them the tools to be able to be completely flexible to do that, right? This is an example of that. I have no idea what type of charts they're going to want to create, which data, what type of relationship they're going to want to create. So this allows me to take that away, just built in that logic, and let them go with it. And I think that's
the same,
extremely very powerful.
It probably applies to the Ask interface too, right? So if we look at into the FileMaker 2024 release, so there's a it's not an add-on, it's or is it an add-on? The the chat interface that has also been made available to the developer community as part of the release this week.
Yeah, so it's about asking about your data. You and I've seen so many iterations of things like that, and I think it's just not it's not uncommon, right, for people nowadays to want to be able to chat with their data. Like they're seeing all these little chatbots out there, and so those things can very much well be built into FileMaker. So if you think about how this is built, right, a chart could just be a chat interface as well. So being able to retrieve the data, generate that, and generate an answer, it's fairly easy to forward.
And if you don't want to build that from scratch, there is is that an add-on or a file or something as part of the 2024 deliverable is what I'm angling towards here that actually allows for the chat interface in your data.
No, we're testing those things. We're trying to bring in some of those things, but in 2024 it's not officially there, so we'll keep you posted as that
scoop. Okay, gotcha. Loud and clear. Yeah. So now I think the biggest thing that we see if we're looking at a lot of the Claris messaging, it really is about semantic search. Can you talk a little bit from a product management standpoint, how that decision was made and what that means, and frankly, in the context of FileMaker searching, how's that different than maybe what we're used to?
So I love semantic search, and during my few moments on stage during the keynote Engage, I was talking about some of the things that we're working on behind. So we're playing with a lot of AI technology at Claris, right? Trying to see what makes sense for us to bring in how. And semantic search just keeps coming up, right? Cris, you and I have talked so much about this as well. But part of what a lot of people are doing is retrieval augmented generation that reduce the amount of hallucinations in your interactions with large language models. And I'd say maybe the preferred way of doing the retrieval is using semantic search. And semantic search isn't new, right? But it definitely has seen a resurgence now with generative AI, and especially with large language models. So I thought that, and especially when we're talking with some of the early testers, that this came up over and over again. Like this is the feature that really is kind of the building block for a lot of the use cases that they're looking
like
at.
the chat we just talked about. Like people may not know that is the linchpin of chatting against your data is the semantic search, the retrieval aspect of it.
Exactly.
As far as vectors are concerned, we should say. So how do vectors, embeddings, and semantic search all fit into FileMaker 2024 in that experience?
And I thought, and I think you guys have talked about it before in the here on the podcast, that semantic search, one of the things that excites me, what recently excites me is, FileMaker already has some really good search capabilities, right? We've had searching FileMaker is fairly easy to use, right? It's a search by example. You don't have to learn, any query language and anything like that. But semantic search really is about finding things by how similar they are to other things, right? Instead of being specifically by lexical, like the exact keywords and things like that. So for instance, in semantic search, if you were to search for improving customer service, it might yield results that include enhancing client support or boosting shopper satisfaction, right? Because semantically, the meaning are very similar, even though that the words
or even opposite. It's pretty fascinating, right? So things
and you can do the opposite as well. That's one of the other use cases, right? To finding outliers in a data set, which is really great. And so you can imagine that if you take semantic search and you use it with the FileMaker traditional keyword-based search and combine those, so you can make some really powerful search capabilities in there, and really build some really cool things. But like you said, there are other things that you can use it for, like finding outliers in a data set. You can use it for recommendation systems and things like that. It just really is really great. But where really I think it shines is when you really combine it with large language models and FileMaker. I think just magic happens. It's really, really amazing. There's some really cool things that happen when you take all these things and bring it together. And so at Engage, I was actually showing one example during the keynote of using a pre-release version of FileMaker that has semantic search and could do some really cool stuff. And I'm really happy to say that version of that application that worked only in a pre-release version in our current release works beautifully.
Nice.
And so I will try to make this file available to everybody, but I don't know if you guys want to see it.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Scoop.
Awesome. All right. So This file is fairly simple, it's fairly straightforward. What it does, it allows you to ask questions about your documents.
So,
And so
and
it's-
when you say documents, just to get it into FileMaker speak here, we're talking about documents stored in a container, yes?
Yes,
Or
documents stored in a container
have
field,
they been
yes.
transcribed into their text representation? Or I mean, there's got to be some sort of overhead, right? Or just storing.
These are
fun
just
steps.
regular files. So I'm gonna take a regular file over here. I'm gonna take just to show you how this works for the end
Ooh,
user. I'm gonna add
nothing up
here,
your sleeve.
nothing up my sleeve. I got already a list of documents already in here. I'm gonna click here to add a brand new
And
document.
does this require a special type of document? Because, you know, obviously we have a lot of flexibility from a binary file storage. Any constraints there?
Right now, the way I built this right now is limited to text files, but it can absolutely be expanded to other types of files. It's just really about how you get the data out of it.
Okay.
Since FileMaker has really easy built-in functions to take text files and just get access to the text, this was just easier for me to start building those things. But no reason why you couldn't say add PDFs or something like that. So I'm gonna just drag this file over here to this container field, and it kind of sucks it in, right? So now I got 24 documents instead of 23. And what happened behind the scenes is that document got split up into, the text was extracted from the file. It got split up into a lot of little chunks. And for each one of those chunks, a vector embedding was created. And those vector embeddings are just numerical representations of the meaning of that text. And then what that allows me to do now is that when I ask it a question, let's say,
and by the way, can I point to the chunk part? I think is actually a really important part here too. The reason that you're not just saying put the whole document as a vector, which you can do, by the way, and there are some use cases possibly where the vectorizing an entire document as one series of vectors may be meaningful. Like, you know, like let's say you're doing resumes versus job descriptions or something. Maybe that, you know, is sort of an interesting way that you can pair needs and solutions. But the reason that we have chunks is to reduce the noise, right? So you may have a 50-page document and the answer to someone's chat question may only be found in a single paragraph on page 3. So we don't want to send them the whole document because the information in the whole document might not be relevant to the question. So instead, what's your, I know sort of the industry standard is 500 token chunks, just for lack of a better reason. What was your approach on this one?
I actually, because FileMaker has built-in, instead of characters, I went with words. FileMaker, one of the great things about FileMaker, we've got 30 years of built-in functions that we've honed over, right? Over years and years and years. So we've got some amazing text parsing functions built into FileMaker. So I actually did by words, which is really cool because you can, that way it wouldn't cut off a word or anything like that. You can do it by sentences, by the way, right? Because FileMaker has that built in too. I just
wait, talk about that. Well, how would you, what FileMaker native tool would you use to isolate a sentence? That's fascinating, actually.
Values.
Counting the periods.
Values.
Oh, if they're return separated.
Yeah, if they're separated. So
Brilliant.
you can do that, or there's several ways of doing this, right? We can, if you ask, I'm sure there's somebody right now listening to this and writing it in the comments, right? Like, well, yeah, you would do this. Of other ways of doing it. So but I just do it by words. It's really fairly straightforward.
So then you do the words, or you could do the sentences. You have these chunks. Now the vectorization process, I don't want to just skip right over that either. That requires actually sending that to an embeddings model. How is that? Let's bring that forward into 2024. How is that happening more natively now than, like, let's say, for example, back in February, the way you were doing it in those examples?
Yeah. So before FileMaker 2024, if you want to get a vector embedding, right, that numerical representation, you would have to talk to some external software, most likely a commercial application through API. So you'd have to call an API, send your data out, get the vector back over there, stored over there, and then use that storage over there to do the search whenever you needed it.
And just to clarify, there are specific models, like, for example, if we just look at OpenAI, they've got the GPT-3 models and 4 and everything, but they also have a separate set of, now they have 3 embeddings models. For example, the one that everyone used to use before was Ada. There's large and I think medium or small or something like that now. And but there's a ton of open source ones as well too. How are embeddings happening for users of FileMaker 2024?
So you got 2 options. You can actually use and we'll go over we can go over the scripts and functions in a second. But you can call directly OpenAI's. We'll start supporting other commercial APIs out there, but we've got a script step inside of FileMaker that allows you to create embeddings, and create embeddings one at a time, or you can create embeddings for an entire set of records for you. And you can either do it through one of the commercial vendors out there like OpenAI, or if you want to run your own and really enhance privacy and protection about your data and want to keep everything local, you can run your own models, you can run your own kind of local server and get one of the open source sentence transformers embedding models out there and run them completely local. And FileMaker will work with that local server that you have using one of those open source models. So we'll run with either one, which is really fantastic.
So
But
the advantage there,
yeah,
just to give some context there. So you're saying, okay, so first of all, there's something to unpack. If the FileMaker 2024 has official support for OpenAI's, not only the language model, the general language models that we're familiar with, like GPT-4o, for example, but also the 3 OpenAI embeddings models as well too, Ada,
models,
and then
yep.
large and small.
Yep,
And then,
it'll work for those.
but not, and now this is, I don't consider this to be deficiency, but not necessarily like, Anthropic or, some of the other models yet. I'm sure those are coming, just for clarity.
Yeah. Yes.
And then I think this is a really important part that people don't maybe not understand, is that in order to create the vectors, it's not just like a function. You have to send it to the language model. And that's actually why that's so powerful, is because it's the language model figuring out all these different dimensions. And embeddings models have different dimensions, meaning I think the best way to plain English that is that you could ask for, you're asking for meaning. So you're saying, hey, here's a word or a sentence or a paragraph or something, and I want to extract features of it, or things that describe it, or attributes of it,
or concepts that are described in that text.
Even better. I like concepts. And the more, I mean, to some degree, the more of those you have available, more features, that you have available, potentially the more meaning you can extract from your data in these vectors.
Exactly.
What support, like how many dimensions are we talking about? Like, you can have up to 4,000 dimensions or 300 or something. And I thought I saw somewhere in here there was support for a pretty significant amount of dimensions, I guess is what I'm getting at. Is there's pretty good support natively.
So we'll support OpenAI supports, I believe it's 1536, I think it is, somewhere around there.
And just to let you know, like our team here, we my guys swear that 300 is plenty. I mean, I'm sure that
I was going to say the exact same thing. There are a lot of use cases where 200-300 is plenty. You don't need that many for every single application.
And as a thought experiment, just to kind of, for people to wrap their heads around it, like Matt and I did a conversation in a previous podcast where I said, hey, Matt, describe the word soccer. Tell me as many features as you can about the word soccer. And Matt's a very smart guy, and he knows the concept of soccer. And we were able to come up with maybe 8 or 10. So to do 300, like that requires, a scalable processing like this. To do 4,000 is just insane. Like you don't really need those. And frankly, that there is a lot of overhead. The more dimensions is the more overhead. It's literally the more vectors, there's more storage, there's more file size.
For sure.
So finding the sweet spot at maybe 300 is actually very beneficial from a decision-making standpoint for a developer.
Mm-hmm. So what all this means, by the way, like at the end of the day, it means once those things are there, then we can search by those meaning. We can search what things are more relevant to something that we're looking for. So say in this case, if I'm asking for, what are the new AI functions in FileMaker 2024, and I've got here a found set of all these different documents that include, Claris Connect, terms of service and things like that, but also the release notes. If I click here on the submit button, what it'll do is it'll take this sentence over here, this question, and it'll create a vector embedding of that. And then it'll compare it. It'll search for all the embeddings in here of all of these documents, find the most relevant ones, and then send those along with the question to a large language model, which then can generate this answer. And not only can it generate the answer, it tells me all the new functions, the new AI related functions, but it'll also tell me what the source is. It'll tell me which part of the document, the ones that I'm looking here, it got the information in order to provide this answer.
So when you're chunking, so we talked about, you're using word chunks, by the way. I can see you actually have, for those listening, if you actually look on, really closely for those that are watching, you can see that he mentions the chunks. So what you're saying is we took a bunch of documents, broke them into chunks, vectorized each individual chunk, and that is the same concept as sending them to an embeddings model and getting vectors in return. storing the vectors. We want to talk a little bit about that too, because that's a big part of the new release.
Absolutely.
How and where are those vectors stored before we're even doing these searches, for example?
So, and I'll show you because it's really cool. So
nice.
So it's not the right one. So they get stored. I got a separate table over here just for the embeddings. And so all the information is stored here. So we've got here, I've got a field here for the document title. I've got here the number of the chunk, but here's the text, right? That's all the text for that particular chunk of this particular document.
And we're not searching the text, just to help people understand
I'm storing
this.
Here. That's
right.
We'll retrieve later, and then we'll send over to the LLM to answer the question. But the vector itself, the embedding, is stored in a container field. And
wait, hold on a second. Stored in a container field. What?
I know. This is awesome.
We're all going to talk at once.
We were able to. The engineers were fantastic. They were able to. The functions here are able to store vectors in a text field, which that's completely normal, right? Because a vector is just an array. It's a bunch of numbers. So you can store it in a text field, and it works perfectly fine in text field.
Mm-hmm. And how is that an advantage over storing it in a text field, for example?
So
an advantage over just having it stored. Like you could store vectors in a text field, for example. Why is it better to do that in a container?
So in the container field allows us to store in a binary format. And so it's smaller. And when we're doing the searches, it's actually much more efficient as well. So it's fast. You get faster results when you're doing the searches. You get smaller footprint as far as storage goes. But it all works inside of a container field. So we're storing it in a binary format, a little file inside a container field. The great thing is that you don't have to make a lot of these decisions. You can, it'll use either one. So if you point it when you're setting up your script step to a container field, it'll assume that these are binary files here. If you point it to a text field, it'll assume that they are in text format, which is really cool.
That's actually massive from an overhead standpoint too, because let's imagine that we took these vectors. By the way, we said 300 dimensions, right, of vectors. That's a ton of text. That's a tremendous amount of text. If you actually store that into a field and then want to search that field, you also have to index that field. So immediately your applications would have become exponentially larger just based on storage and indexing. Instead,
even if you can also use external containers, right? So your database gets even smaller.
You could.
So wait, so these containers these containers that store the vectors can also have external storage?
You could. Well, probably not. You'll probably lose a little bit of speed there, right? Because you still have to. There's a little bit more reading outside, but it does work with external storage.
Interesting. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
And that would, like, if you have a large database with 1 million things, and this is a significant size of data for every single record, then that would be a big difference. But it's good to know that actually it would be faster if you did them internally.
That's
to summarize a little bit. So, this feels sort of like an index. Basically, when you create a record, you run this process to create vectors of the representation of that data in that record. Then, and that doesn't require any, well, it may or may not require getting that data out to some service like OpenAI. You said you can run that locally on your computer as well. Then you do the search. So let's talk about the search part, unless I'm jumping the gun.
Wait, hold on. What is not having to get sent out to OpenAI and done locally? Just to clarify, because you can't actually. So you're saying if you're using the local embeddings model option is what you're talking about there? Just to be clear, because FileMaker isn't generating embeddings itself. I just want to make sure that we're not confusing anyone. So it's either using OpenAI's where you are sending it out to the language model, like we said, you support the OpenAI's, or the local, in the case that Matt, you were just describing, is you're talking about like an open source model that's running on your machine, for example, right?
Right. Yeah, like on the FileMaker server or some other computer in your control.
Makes sense. Okay.
Okay.
Just wanted to clarify that.
Yep. So once it's there, then we can perform the search, and I'll show you the script. It's really fairly simple. This is not really.
And these are the 2024 script steps that we're looking at here. Okay, so for those that are listening, we'll navigate you through here. But so in general, the new script steps, just to give people a high level, we have a configure AI account, insert embedding in found set. And then the last two are perform semantic find and set AI call logging. So I just wanted to let people know what has been released. Those are just the AI script steps. There might be some other stuff too, but talk a little bit about how you use those.
And to make it easier, we created a brand new section here in the script step on the pane here on the right side. And so
yeah, look at that.
that's just about artificial intelligence. So all the new script steps are here. Configure AI account. Right?
Oh, those are,
and we
hey,
also,
that's an old one. The old
and
configure
yeah,
machine learning
exactly.
model.
The configure machine learning model, which
Cool.
it's about CoreML. We've put that, classified it in there. We thought it might be good to move it out of miscellaneous and move it into
Oh, it
artificial
was
intelligence.
miscellaneous. Oh, so
Yeah.
sad.
So we got insert embedding, insert embedding and found set, perform semantic find, and then set AI call logging.
Okay,
So
cool.
yeah, so for creating start creating all these things, you first have to configure an AI account, and that means providing an API key, whether that's going to be for OpenAI or even if it's your own local model, you still want some security set up there, and you can configure that. And so this script step is all about configuring that. Where's your embedding model being hosted? What's the API key, and be able to authenticate that, and then give that a name.
By the way, for those that are familiar with the configure machine learning model script step, it's really doing the same thing. The configure machine learning model would take a stored CoreML model, .ml model file, for example, and make it available in that user session. So this is the same thing that it's doing, but for the LLM. So now, so if I'm one of the many users of this AI embedded FileMaker application, I still, in my session, need to configure the account, right? I'm not configuring the account for all the other users. This is the same thing as we do with CoreML. Okay, good. Just
exactly the same thing. Yeah, and then you can choose who the provider is. Like I said, we've got OpenAI from the get-go, but you can also choose custom. You can have a local, or you can run your own server. Then you can choose this custom over here, and then you can provide where the endpoint is. Where does that live?
Would you suggest doing this at the beginning of this? So just philosophically, this is the same kind of thing with CoreML. Would you suggest doing this on login of the system, or when the user is about to engage with AI functionality within their session? What's your approach?
I like to do it at the very beginning. I like to keep all the things that are I'll have a configuration and use them on later on, just to have them in one place. So for me, the logical place to put it is on first window open. So I normally have a script, like most of us, that'll trigger when you open the application. And I'll usually have a section there, or I'll call the script that does all these configurations.
So there's no overhead for it running in the background that we would need to be concerned about. And then secondly, if I try to do one of the supported script steps, like perform semantic find before this was done, do we get an error message?
Yeah, you'll get an error.
Okay.
Got it. And there's very little overhead of having this one, because all it's doing is one API call and then storing that response.
So like a handshake, basically.
Just a handshake, that's all. Yeah.
And by the way, that's kind of cool, because that's the first time we've actually had any kind of a script step in FileMaker that directly does an API call without any extra hoopla. Yeah.
You hit on it. That's absolutely right.
Yeah, good point.
This is one of the things where we're making a lot of some different things here. It's calling for a lot of different really great approaches here, and
that's meaningful. In the old the ones you used to be doing prior to 2024 were all insert from URL, like API calls to language models. And so now you've kind of like broken up the insert from URL into various different steps to make it easier for users to be able to do that. And this is a great example of one of those steps that you've done.
And for what it's worth, you can still use insert from URL script step. If you want to talk directly to the API, fantastic. We're not taking that away. We believe that there's a way to make this a lot easier for users, right? It's all about reducing the amount of effort that it takes for you to bring these features, power features by AI into your applications. And so we're just bridging that gap and making it a lot easier.
Can we take a look at that perform semantic find step?
Absolutely. So I'll go, so this script here is the one that really answers the question. And so here I'll walk you through, won't go through every single step, but some cleanup here at the beginning, get some preparation. Here we're just setting things up to find the chunks that are relevant to the question.
So this is the native FileMaker part of the question and retrieval part. Okay.
So all it does, so I'm doing here, go to related records. I'm just kind of showing some of showing the records there. But here's where the perform semantic find happens. So I'm going to search here for all the embeddings, right, across my table that are semantically similar to the question that was answered. And here's an interesting thing.
Can you hit the gear icon on that? Sorry, Ronnie. Just I think this is really important for those that are new to this, but you're calling out an embedding model in the perform semantic find. You are actually embedding the question at this point. Is that correct? And not the answers that have already been embedded. So at the point that a user is asking a question, all the documents have already gone through the embedding process.
Correct.
You're now
That's
embedding
right.
the question, which I think is kind of a hidden thing that people don't know is happening in chats.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we're doing two things. This script sub can do two things, right? It'll take and it'll depend on here on what type of query it is. And we'll go with this one, which is kind of the easiest one, what we're doing here, which is query by natural language. What that means is you give it some text, it'll create the vector embedding for that text, and then use that embedding to find all the other embeddings that are similar to that one, right? Because none of that's the way it happens. And so, give it what the count that we want to use, which model we want to use, and then here's the text. This is the question that was asked. This is the text that we're going to create a vector embedding for. And then where are we going to search? We're going to search in the found set. And this is the vector embedding container field that we're going to search in. And we made this on purpose. You can either search through all your records, or you can search through the found set. And the reason is you may not want to search through all of your records. It's possible that you may do a semantic find after you do a traditional FileMaker find. You might reduce the amount of records by searching through categories. Maybe we're searching only for support documents, or maybe these are only legal documents, or maybe these are HR things. And so you can reduce the amount of those records and then perform the find only in that current found set.
And the advantage is speed. Is one of the big ones. And for those that are listening, you set this up with the go to related records step that precedes this. So you can leverage existing relationships and queries to be able to establish those contexts within your scripts. And so, and that's a huge point. Like a lot of intelligence is built into the found set so you're really kind of constraining. And the other part too, for those that might have a little bit more experience with the AI stuff, this is actually like a re-rank. So if you look at you've created a found set already in FileMaker using a lexical search, which is index based or relationship based, like you've done here with go to related record. Then within that found set, you can actually do something as well too. So you can reorder, which would be a true re-rank, but now you're actually searching within, which is kind of a fascinating approach.
Yeah, that's cool. There's a couple of other things I love about this too that I'm not sure if you're going to remember point out or not. But when you get the results back, they're ranked. They're sorted by
they are sorted.
sort.
Well,
They
and so the ranking is key.
So the ranking is there.
Really hard to do.
That is the re-rank part. Yeah, specifically, that's huge.
Yeah. So if you ever use like any of the other, the vector database that has metadata, a lot of them provide a way for you to include in the query some sort of filter information. So you can, query again by category or something like that. And so that will, again, that reduces the set of vector embeddings that you're searching for. This basically equates to that. So if you're doing a search to found set after performing a search, a regular FileMaker search, right? A traditional FileMaker search, it is basically the same thing, right? You're going to reduce that and you can make it a lot more relevant. Because you might find, like, maybe you're looking for support documents per se, right? And but what you're looking for, if you didn't do this, you might come up with something from HR, but it might not be relevant to your particular use case, right? Well, even though they are semantically, maybe they are semantically similar, but it might not be relevant for you.
That's managed by return count here, right? And so those that are doing like this outside of FileMaker, this is also what's determined as the threshold of your search. So sometimes you can say, give me the most similar result from my vector search. Talk about how that's similar and a little bit different with return count here. I know that's kind of a big deal in this process.
So return count allows you to specify how many records do you want back, right? Because you might.
So not the threshold, not the similarity threshold, just to be clear.
Not yet. Not yet.
Got
the
it.
return count is how many records do you want back, and you'll get your typical calculation. But over here, and I'm not using it here in this particular case, but here then you do have a threshold, and so I can say,
and that's called
only those.
For those listening, it's the cosine similarity condition option that's in the perform semantic search script set.
That's right.
So
we added several. We added several logical options here: greater than, less than, equal to, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, and this allows you then to specify in the cosine similarity value what value do you want to compare with it? So I can say, only show me those that are greater than 0.7.
And now pause for a moment, because cosine similarity is a new concept for people too. This is a great time to bring it up. There is a function called cosine similarity, which literally just takes the cosine. Well, you can talk about what that means based on your question, let's say in this case, and then the cosine of the answer that comes back and tells how semantically similar those things are. And there's a function to do that. How does cosine similarity work in the search function context that we're looking at here?
So there are several ways of calculating how similar two vectors are, and cosine is one of the most popular ones. So we decided to go with cosine similarity. So built into FileMaker, there are now functions and there's capabilities of calculating the cosine similarity between two vectors. And so what this script step is doing here is using those new capabilities in order to perform that find, right? To reduce the amount of records that it finds and find the most relevant ones. So I can say, hey, give me only those that have a cosine similarity that is greater than 0.7. The cosine similarity returns values between -1, where something is very, very, very different, okay, to 1, where two things would be extremely alike or almost identical. 0 means that they have absolutely nothing in common. You can go either way.
Perpendicular.
So
these are represented as 0 point whatever values. Often you may see these as discussed. This is not
like 30 decimal places.
I mean, you probably want to round those, but a lot of times people talk about these as percent similarity, and it's not wrong. But I think it's probably a good way to sort of plain English it. But it's very similar to like in Core ML, for example. When you're doing you're sending an image over to a trained model in Core ML, you're actually getting back every single possible classification of that image with also a 0 point value. In those cases, you're getting an array where the entire list of classifications, they all have a value and then together they add up to 100. That's not the same thing here, right? Just to kind of to compare and contrast.
Yeah, this is just saying what the value, the calculation between these two things, again, looking at the different concepts that are captured in the embeddings, how similar are vector 1 and vector 2. And in this case,
the key is the closer they are, the higher the
higher that number, or closer to 1 it is. Let's put it that way, right? The closer to 1.
Matt talked about re-ranking. This is the thing that you were talking about, Matt. Like when you're sorted by this, it's by that cosine similarity.
Yeah. And so the results I get back here, in this case, I'm asking for 10. Those 10 records will be sorted by this cosine similarity, where the top one, the first record in that found set, will have the highest cosine similarity value. Okay, again,
there's a question I have to ask.
In this case. Go ahead.
So if you have a found set of 100, or you have a found set of 10, like if your return count is 10 or 100, are you going to still get the exact same 10 records at the top, or could it be different?
Explain the question. Sorry.
So like if you configure this two different ways for the exact same search, one of them is the return count of 10, and one of them is the return count of 100. You're going to be looking at the first 10 records. Are they going to be the same, or could they be different?
If they're both searching, if you're searching through the entire database, you'll probably get the same ones at the top.
Yeah, that's okay. So there's kind of the way to tune this. So what about the performance of this, right? So if you're searching on 100,000 records, is it going to have to actually read the container data? I guess one of the other things I really want to point out here is this is all happening locally. This to me is the magic part, right? But if you wanted to do this before, you had to actually send a bunch of data out, have the query on some other thing, or have your data, sync to some other server in a non-FileMaker
well, just to be clear, it had to go out at some point for the embeddings to be created. Now they're stored locally.
Now it's local, right? So you can, once it's
but the question needs to be embedded as well too, so that if you're choosing OpenAI, that does need to go out. The local part, there's two things. I think when you're saying local, you're saying the vectors are stored in those as binary in the containers. That is truly local. But also you could use a open source model that a lot of people refer to as local to do this. So when you ask the question, you don't, like, for example, the application doesn't know what the user's question is, that still needs to
Right.
be embedded.
I get that.
So
I get that. But what I'm saying is like once the question is asked and once the embeddings are done and it's comparing the question embedding to the data embedding,
yes, just to
what
clarify, yeah.
yeah. So is it then like looping through all of those records? So how would you, what's actually happening and how do you optimize that? Here's my two questions.
Okay. I think it will be good to bring one of the engineers to go through all the underlying technical aspects, but it is going through each one of those embeddings. They've got some really amazing magic. They're loading a lot of this stuff into memory. I think the cool part though is if you're running this hosted on FileMaker Server 2024, we actually leverage FileMaker Server to do a lot of that work. And so
Yes.
depending on, they do some really amazing magic where depending on, how many records you're looking at, how many records are already downloaded to the client side and things like that, part of that find will be offloaded to the server to perform, and then you only get the results, which I think is fantastic. So there's some really great benefits of just having FileMaker Server and have a good server, have the hardware to support all this stuff. But yes, it will happen here locally. It loads most of it in memory, but it'll try to leverage FileMaker Server whenever it can.
Ronnie, is that just on cloud, FileMaker Cloud?
No, FileMaker Server.
Awesome.
FileMaker Server. Yeah.
So a great reason to go upgrade your server to FileMaker 2024.
Yeah.
And real,
now, Matt, I wanted to show you this, Cris, because I think you're getting a blast out of this. One of the options over here, like what I was using here in this particular application, is because there's text, I'm just writing the text there, and you don't know, like you said, what the text is going to be. The option here for what the query is natural language. That means give me text, we'll convert it into a vector embedding, and then we'll find things that are similar to that. However, there are cases where you already have the embedding. So let's, for example, if we have a document, right? All of these documents have embeddings. What if we want one of those documents, and we want to find other documents that are similar to that document? There's no reason to re-encode it, to re-embed that document. So we can actually choose here vector data, and then we can choose a container field that we're going to use as a search criteria, and then point it to other container fields where we're going to search for similar ones in there. So because I know, Cris, you and I have been talking about some of the use cases here where that would be involved, right? So recommendation systems, finding, pairing up, and this type of this option over here enables you to do that.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's a huge deal. And then in either case, you're getting a return count, and so this is similar but different than confidence, for example. Just assuming maybe people have worked with CoreML before, you're getting back a confidence of all the potential classifications. Here, though, it's a found set, and technically, if you say return count 10, unlike with confidence, where they will be the percentage of how confident the model is that it's identified or classified something, here, technically, you could have a situation where you really have 1,000 records that come back as potential matches. You're constraining it to 10. They could all technically have like a 0.89 similarity. They don't cascade like a confidence does. I think that's probably an important thing to clarify.
And that's where adding the cosine similarity condition comes into play. If you want to make sure that these things are highly related or more related, or have at least a minimum threshold of similarity, then you would use a cosine similarity condition and say, hey, I don't want you to bring just which ones are the most relevant, regardless of how relevant they are. I want you to
like
give
a really, really poor
have...
search can still yield some records. It's going to find something, like Google always finds something, but it might be useless.
Now, bear in mind, if you add this condition there, like you said, maybe there aren't any documents like that. And so it's possible that this condition of 10 won't be met. Maybe there are no documents. Maybe there's only 5 that condition. And so it will bring 5.
Both of them together. And this is, and then, so like, for example, in the CoreML support, you have the return at least 1 or the top 1. So all you're really caring about is the top 1. I will just say, from out in the field, building and deploying these applications, a lot of our bots only pick the top 1. Like, our threshold is give us the most relevant. And there is very much a science to how much more you want to return. So this is not arbitrary. This should be taken very seriously. And this comes from testing. you have to go do searches. You have to have your test and your ground truth. And that's how you figure out that threshold. That is not a random, just pick whatever and go ahead. This could be, that absolutely is a lever that will help you get good quality results from your semantic searches or not. So just to kind of point to how important that is.
Yep.
What's the speed going to be if you're searching against, say, 100 records or 1 million records?
It depends. It depends on several things, whether you've got them stored in text, if you've got them in embeddings, if you're using server, what you have on your machine, right? Hardware here is very important because there's a lot of calculations that happen in there.
Yeah.
So as an example, if you've got an Intel-based machine on a Mac versus an M3, you're going to have different performance for sure.
But I mean, are we talking like if you're searching on 1 million or 10 million records, like a minute, or is it just going to be seconds, or like, in general?
I've never tried with 1 million, so I don't know. But hundreds of thousands could take several seconds. If you're,
okay. Oh, sure. But still, that's
on the machine. It'll take a few seconds.
That's still pretty fast, right? I mean,
oh yeah.
And if you're like,
especially,
if you're on a normal hosting environment with a really good cloud server, like an AWS server that can boost its processing as it needs to when the demand hits.
That being said, I've seen in some of our testing, we had one of our engineers do a search. He was here in the US. We had a remote server. He performed a search on 43,000 records, and that happened within a second. But again, it all depends on what the hardware is, what your network. There's a lot of conditions that come into play for sure.
Right.
But the more records that you're searching all at once, right? Obviously, that's going to increase how long it takes. It does.
So Ronnie, when you're doing that, when you're doing these types of calls through insert from URL, we are all very familiar with the message that pops up that shows the progress of that API call and the return. Is that the same, or is that different, or has that gone away, or what does that look like in the new paradigm in FileMaker 2024?
That goes away. That's one of the great things about creating scripts that are specifically designed to talk to APIs, and we can do things that we couldn't do or not there yet in FileMaker. And this is a great example. So this script over here, this is the one that calculates the embeddings for the document. And so I'll walk through. It's very short. You can see there's not that many. There's more white space here than there are lines of code.
One important line.
18, right there, but there's only one important line here, which is insert embedding in found set. And it does exactly what the name implies. It's going to create vector embeddings for every record that's in the found set. So again, I give it the name of the account that I'm using so that it knows where to call and what the API, what the embedding model is, and all that fun stuff. Then I'm going to take what the source is. Hey, you're going to be taking this text field, and then you can create embeddings, and then you can put it into this other field, or this container field. Now, as you can imagine, this is making, behind the scenes, making API calls, making a lot of API calls, right? Because I can have 1,000, 20,000 records over here. But it's doing so in a way where you're not going to see that dialogue, Cris, that you're talking about, right? We're doing this almost asynchronously.
That's huge.
Behind the scenes, which is fantastic. You can almost leave this running. It's really great. You'll see.
Are these server-side supported script steps as well?
Yes, they are. They are.
So that's the move, right? Like,
that,
I mean, when you're doing your
getting there, you can have this running on the server there as well. So if you, especially for creating the embeddings, maybe maybe you already have embeddings from a different system, maybe you're using something else, they're already in text, but you want to convert them. We have functions in this release that allow you to convert from text to binary and binary to text again. So if you already have those from something else, you can convert them into binary, and again, you can offload those to the server and have those.
As long as those are supported for the code, like, so when you're talking about cosine similarity, I think we can refer to that as like, that's a specific type of function, let's say, that's used to be able to determine similarity. If you have run embeddings that do not use cosine similarity, you wouldn't want to port those over, though. I think just as a cautionary advice. You would run embeddings that support, let's say, call it support cosine similarity, I think is the way to put that.
Yeah, I think the biggest requirement that the engineering team has put here is that you want to use embeddings that have been, I forgot the word right now. So there's process for embeddings where you take away the length of the vector itself. You normalize it. That's the word I'm looking for. So you want to use models that create a normalized embeddings. most of the ones you're going to be out there commercially available, OpenAI is one of them. They're all normalized. I don't want to get down into what the details of what that means. But for the vector, it means that you're just reducing the length of the vector to 1, just to make the math easier. So,
But if
the
you
point
just
here
as
is
the,
that you have,
if you have already run embeddings and you're using Euclidean distance, for example, you cannot port over those vectors into your FileMaker application. You will need to re-embed those with something that supports cosine similarity, as an example of
yes.
and if you're just doing it from scratch, cool. You've already got all that built into FileMaker. It's going to help you do that.
Yeah. The other things is you can't really mix and match, or you shouldn't mix and match
Same model.
models, right? Yes. So if you embedded all these with, say, text embedding ADA 02, when you're doing the search, you need to use the exact same model, right? To embed the query that you're making there. If you use a different model, you'll get some really awkward.
Yeah. So in the future, like a different, more powerful model could come out. You'd basically just replace all your embeddings with the new model and switch over to new search.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And
Okay. I have another question that's burning.
We're talking about embeddings. Just to be clear, you can mix and match whatever models you want to speak to if you're not using embeddings, not to confuse anybody on that.
Okay. Yes.
So yeah.
Okay.
Just talking about the embeddings.
So
but I think what's important here is that, you're creating all the embeddings, like all the embeddings here for this. This is all the code I had to write. If I had to do this with the insert from URL script step, I mean, this script would have been very much longer. Just handling the errors, right? Just handling the errors alone, right, would have been this amount of text, this amount of lines of code. But yeah, we take care of all that for you.
That's cool. I mean, this is kind of the magic of what FileMaker has done since the beginning, right? It's taken things like this one and made them kind of magic, right? From the export or create PDF and automatically send the mail to a lot of other things like that. Okay, my burning question.
Go ahead.
So the example that you just showed, you're searching against like a container field that you imported, like a PDF or a text file. What if you have a record that has like an account with a bunch of people who work there and a bunch of invoices and line items for the invoices? And you want to find I want to find the most similar account or something in that particular data. Do you, would you wrap that up into like a JSON object and then embed that whole thing? Or what's the process for searching for how can semantic search really empower that for the user?
So I'll give you, I should give you an example. How about that?
Yes.
If I can, give me 1 second and I'll pull it up. Because was actually a question that came up in one of our test groups in ETS on that, right? How do we do certain things? What's the best way of looking for some of these things? Give me 1 second.
We could frame it, give you a chance to look that up, frame it as non-document searches, right? So what we've been talking about and focusing on here is taking documents, turning them into vector searchable data using the embedding process. Now we're talking about raw text. And how can we make that searchable in a semantic manner as well?
Yeah, text, numbers, dates, the typical type of data that you'd have in a FileMaker table.
Yeah,
it's a great question. Multiple tables, right? So relational is the other thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So here's an example. I've got this. Yeah, this table has just a bunch of sneakers, right? So just imagine these are retail items and things like that. And I've got semantic search, that's actually performing semantic search in 2 different ways, or semantic search for 2 different pieces of information.
Okay.
They're the exact same ones. So in here, I'm searching for running shoes. If I just put running shoes, it searches for both of them. And
just for those listening, what we're seeing on the left-hand side, you're actually seeing embedding using plain field values and then embedding using descriptive values. You want to frame up the difference between those 2 things?
And then the result inexplicably is a bunch of cars and pigeons and things that are not running shoes.
They are running shoes. But I'm going to search here. So what's happening here is on the left-hand side, it's just using the plain fields. It's looking at the values of the fields with nothing else, with no context.
Price, description, name, that kind of thing.
Yes, with no context whatsoever. On the right side, it's using a more descriptive field that's taking all the information from the rest of the record and providing some context around it. So
that's exactly what Matt's talking about in his example.
So I'm searching here for black running shoes. That's pretty good. The search results are fairly similar. But now I'm going to search here for low-rated sneakers. right?
Hmm.
And mind you that most of these records don't say sneakers, they say shoes, right? They don't say sneakers. And so
Or
now
trainers, you could say trainers and it would still know,
yeah,
right?
or something like that. And what happens here is that the results are fairly different. On the right side, you've got things that are very high, like 4.7 and 4.6, and a scale of 1 to 5, right? And the reason is the data that it's searching for, what was embedded here is these fields that you see here. Just this data. I just took those values just as it is right there, and just created the embedding for those. So for those who are listening, it just says, just the name of it has the name of the item. It says beige shoes 60 in stock, 60 again 3.9. If I were to tell
and
you
you're
3.9,
concatenating all those values together in a calculation or something. Okay.
Yep. Okay. And embedding those. And if I would tell you, Matt, this shoe is 3.9 with nothing else, you have no clue. There's no context. You have there's no meaning behind it. The same thing happens with embeddings. Like there's no context. I can't tell you what is similar, right? And so these things is really hard to find something there. Now, in this case, on the right-hand side, you're getting better results because we're taking those exact same fields, and what it did was create a sentence that wraps around all that data and gives it some context. So it now reads, these superstar mules are beige shoes priced at $60 that are currently in stock. They have been reviewed 60 times and not favored by customers.
Right. Brilliant. And you used a LLM to do that for you, right?
So no, this is actually calculation FileMaker. It's just calculation FileMaker.
Oh, so you're okay, but I think that's important though. So while you could use an LLM to take those non sequiturs in that list and create a sentence of it, you did this in a fancy FileMaker calculation locally.
Correct. Yeah.
So the text we're looking at on the right
and searches.
Was that actually a previously generated query before you did all this that's then stored in the database somehow? Or is that something that's actually happened for all of those records when the search is performed?
No, these are pre-calculated values. So I'm just taking those fields. What you see in blue in the sentence, those are the actual field values. And so I created a calculation field that concatenates some text with those fields and creates this sentence.
Got it.
And just as an example of another way you can use an LLM, you could have absolutely gone in and said, hey, language model, completely independent of embeddings, just because we've been talking a lot about embeddings, but it absolutely nothing to do with embeddings at all. You could just take the bullet points that you were showing on the left, send them over to a language model and ask it to write with whatever prompt instructions you want, write these summaries and do that and store it as text. Instead, Ronnie, because he's got superpowers in FileMaker, has created a calculation with that same logic to do the same thing.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. And so that's exactly kind of what I was trying to get at is the power of kind of combining two different things, right? So like a summary feature in a language model with an API call with this native, semantic find feature to get really, really amazing results like this. So will this work on names, addresses, number values? Like what are the things that's going to be good for? Obviously, it's great for things like this. What are the things that's going to be good for, and what are the things that's not going to be good for, do you think?
I haven't found things that are not good for it. That, again, as long as there's some context around it. And if you give it something like 60, 3.9, there's no context. There's no meaning.
Right.
But if I say, this is a highly rated item that's been used many times, then that has a different meaning. And so in the multidimensional space of concepts, right, this can be a lot easier to search.
In this case, though, we're looking at
almost anything can be converted right into
well, yeah, but we're looking at English words with things, right? So what if it's a bunch of names, like first names and last names and addresses, and we want to find like the closest match that might include, misspellings or things like that? That's going to be, to me, I would think that would be a lot harder to do, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know how that would work, because again, semantic search really is looking for meaning. Don't know how that would apply there. But.
Yeah, so I guess my questions are maybe it would break it down by syllable or similarity and how it would sound, and maybe it would actually build some of those meanings in there. Anyway, I was hoping you'd know. I'm going to try it.
Interesting use case. I'd love to try it. Yeah, let me know.
Yeah,
I would just add in the context of what we're talking about here, just to kind of point to that again. One superpower of language models is to do these types of summaries and extract this type of meaning. So just because we haven't really given many examples of just how you can use the language models themselves, be way beyond question answering, you can do exactly the type of thing that we're talking about. Take a bunch of data, give it some instructions, and tell it how to create descriptions. And sometimes those descriptions might not be for users to consume, but they could be something that you're using for embeddings to be able to increase the performance on your semantic search as well too. So just something for people to think about, because that's actually very common in the non-FileMaker AI space to do that type of thing. So now, oh my God, right? So, okay, we've looked at configure AI account, which is a big deal. And I think it's an even bigger deal that we're not seeing in any of the demonstrations. For those that haven't seen it, we have not seen a progress bar of any kind, of any dialogue that's popped up. That's a huge, huge deal. You also showed us insert embedding in found set. We've talked a lot about how meaningful that is from a found set standpoint. And all of these have been executed using perform semantic find. I did notice that you were following your perform semantic finds with set AI call logging. Is that a good discipline, or what's actually happening there, or what wouldn't happen if you weren't doing the logging?
Yeah. So one of the new scripts that we've got is set AI call logging. And when we were testing these out, and the feedback that we were getting was, well, because these are making API calls, which is new, right? It's new for us to have a script step that does behind the scene does API calls.
That's huge.
Having some visibility on what's happening behind the scenes is really important, because we're hiding a lot of the complexity. Well, but when you're troubleshooting stuff, you really need to see what's going on and see what the results are, what you're getting back. What's being sent is almost as important, as sometimes even more important than what you're getting back.
Well, from a troubleshooting standpoint, it's critical, right? Like,
absolutely.
There's nothing so magic here that you can just turn these things on and let her rip. As a matter of fact, for reporting from out on the street and how these work in non-FileMaker AI, we mentioned record counts. That's not arbitrary. Just really want to drive that home. Your threshold that you're establishing of cosine similarity in your returns is extremely scientific. It's different from one search use case to the next. People need to take that seriously. And the way you figure out those thresholds are literally by testing, rigorous testing, doing a bunch of searches, and having humans, or hopefully subject matter experts, are human in the loop, look at it and go, yeah, you know what? One of the things you can do, for example, let's say you're doing translation semantics or cosine similarity. You could say, here's English to Spanish translations. You could do 100 of them, send them over to someone like Ronnie, who is bilingual, and say, Ronnie, could you grade all 100 of these English to Spanish translations from a 1 to 5 scale, let's say. And then behind the scenes, you could correlate what the human in the loop said were high quality translations with what your cosine similarity threshold is. And you might look and go, wow, all the ones that Ronnie said were, 4-star or higher are all from 0.78 threshold or higher. You would then take the knowledge of that and go build that into your semantic search script step if in fact you were doing if you were using the cosine threshold there as an example of why that is so important and non-trivial. Because if you just set it as 10 or you just keep it at the same threshold every time, it's gonna your quality of your output is going to be dramatically different. So I just think it's important for people to know that as developers, we're taking on the responsibility for the outputs in those cases.
So AI is creating significantly more work for us rather than taking it away, which is good news.
Let's
just put it this way: it's even more work if you're not using the FileMaker tool set to be able to pull that off.
So well, I guess regardless of what it is, it's allowing us to leverage what we've built and do way more for our clients.
The upside is so worth the extra work. There's no doubt about it. And then so Ronnie, like on a function standpoint, we talked a lot about cosine similarity. That's literally where you're taking, if we were to use the translation example, we would take the vector for the English phrase and then the vector for the Spanish phrase, and it literally just says give us the distance between the two of them, which is really the literally a mathematical difference of those two. That is what the new cosine similarity function does in FileMaker. The only other functions, and I'm not belittling them by any means, but just so that we're touching on them, they're all get functions, right? Get embedding as file, get embedding as text, get table DDL. So what's going on there? Hello.
So all right, let's bring these up. And so just like we did with the script steps, we have a brand new section here called artificial intelligence.
functions.
So
Oh my
everything,
goodness.
everything that has to do with AI is put in the same here category, including those that we had before, right? Like the compute model,
Compute model.
which was there before. But you've got, like you said, cosine similarity takes two vectors, right? Vector 1 and vector 2, which can be text or can be containers, and it will return a value between -1 and 1, depending on how similar, how closely they are in from a semantic standpoint, right? Those two things. The other ones, just because they say get, they're not, they're not these are your standard get, right? These are
these aren't the get open parens.
Exactly.
Ones.
Yeah.
The
These
other
are
gets.
the other gets. Yes.
Yeah.
And so we got some really interesting ones in here. So I think one that's going to be interesting, just to so that everybody here is aware that we've got a function here that can literally calculate the embedding. So we're giving you both a script step and a function that can get the embedding, that can calculate the embedding.
Whoa.
And the reason we did this is that there are situations where you might want to create the embedding immediately, for example, in maybe in the auto enter. Maybe you want to create it in there, make part of the calculation.
What?
Or you can use this function inside of a set
not
field.
auto enter. Come on.
You just freaked me out.
I'm not saying you should. I'm saying you could.
It's possible. Yeah.
It's possible.
I mean, a creation of a record should be script based. So what I mean is obviously when the script finishes making the record.
Naturally.
But for example, inside of a set field,
yeah,
you can use this calculation in there inside of a set variable. And there's different situations where it makes sense to use a calculation instead of a script step. So we have that available here for you. So you get to choose depending on the situation, what do you want to use. And then again, because you might already have embeddings from talking to APIs, you might have them in text fields as text. So we've got two functions here that allow you to go from text to binary and from binary to text, which is really great. So you can convert those back and forth anytime you need.
The get model attributes is a core element.
It's been there. Right? Yep. You've been there. I'm going to skip this over real quick.
DDL.
Wait. Would you take it easy? So get token count is really useful because this allows you to calculate how many tokens something might have, which I think is really great.
I wouldn't say it's useful. It's a critical component.
You have to have something. You have to be able to calculate this because, especially if you're talking with an API, you want to know how much this is going to cost you. How big this is. There are so many things that you want to make sure that you understand what you're doing, and especially inside of a script, this is a great way to. This is a great function to have, and so you can start looking into making sure you got everything the right.
And by the way, on the logging, there's a verbose. Is that also doing the token count? Because token counts in logging is critical.
Yes, it'll verbose means it'll give you all the details of all the calls, all the APIs,
number of tokens used,
everything.
Got it.
Basically, it's a raw dump of every single call, which is really great.
Sorry. A big deal, important discipline, and the reason I'm interjecting there is because when you start playing with language models, especially for the first time, you may not realize how much tokens you're using until your bill shows up at the end of the month.
Absolutely.
And for those of us that are building on behalf of our clients, you have to take the testing, and again, testing, I know, shocker. The testing is an extremely valuable phase of this for you to be able to establish expectations for your clients for in-production token use. I can just tell you from out in the wild that we'll do an experiment, and then the very first thing the client wants to know is how much is this going to cost me to run this in production? And the only way you can do that is to figure out your token costs in your account there, both from literally dollars cost, and then just like, processing cost and speed cost and different things like that too. They're all affected.
Yeah.
Now, okay, get table DDL.
So before that, while all of this here has been really about getting about semantic search, about really talking about doing semantic search and all that fun stuff, even if you're doing things with insert from URL script step, you still, if you want to talk to a large language model, like say, for example, you're doing the smart dashboard that I was doing, you still have to send the schema of your data, right? And right now, sending that schema, especially if you're doing with SQL, It's kind of cumbersome for FileMaker developers. It really isn't a really good way of doing that. There's a couple of ways we could do that, but you still have to create some calculations and functions. So we thought it'd be great because we think that this is going to be a very common application where you send your schema over to an LLM for something like that we'd have a function dedicated to doing exactly that. So what this function does is it literally creates a what's called a data definition language, or DDL, which basically is it's a SQL statement that describes the table that you have in there, that you're asking for in there. And so they make it a lot easier for you to bring that information and be able to send it to large language models.
And by the way,
it's just one of those. It's one of those. It's one of those helper tools, right? To make it a lot easier for you to send those things over to them.
Well, and this is huge because if you try to send your actual DDL or your FMXML, for example, over, you're going to crash it. The token limit on those is insane. So you're actually creating a like cleaned up or pre-processed version of this. I think is probably the most important part of that.
Array. That's sweet.
So I think, it's one of those things where it's going to be really nice. You can send more than one table name in there. So I'll group those. There's some really great applications here for it. I think it's one of those things that people are going to be using a lot. So we just thought it would be great to have that in here, just starting with this release.
That's great.
Huge. And one last question on the new stuff, Ronnie, just in general, we talked a lot about how you have OpenAI support soon, probably other models soon to come, maybe as soon as next week. I don't know. I'm not making it. I'm just being silly, but there may be other models that might be closer to the family, let's say, that might be supported. Who knows? Whatever, just speculating. But when you're talking about open source, what is specifically through Hugging Face? Is that what's happening there? Not necessarily like something you have installed locally, just for clarity there. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and we've got we posted a technical engineering blog that goes through the process of installing it, and also listing all the models that we've tested internally, the open source embedding models that we've tested, and make sure that we know that they work, and you can be a little bit more confident in using yourself. But yeah, these are models that you'll be able to download from Hugging Face. And start using them yourselves, which is really great.
Excellent. And so the options, the LLM options in version 21.01 at least, are OpenAI and specific Hugging Face open source models. And there's support both for Mac OS, Ubuntu, and Windows. That's also important to know as well, since those are locally run. And I guess there's a Python environment. I see some .py files that are run here. So is that on the FileMaker server side? There's actually a Python environment that's running? Is that true?
What we're doing, we're including some Python scripts to help people do the installation of the required software to run these. You don't have to put it in a FileMaker server. You can put it wherever it's accessible, but you might want to put it on the same servers. You leverage the same hardware that you have in there, but giving you everything that you need to get up and running, installing software that will allow you to host these models there for you.
Man, so okay, wow. So all right, so what a week, and what a conversation. Ronnie, what's next? What are the plugs here? Where can we send people for more information? Where are you going to be talking about this? Where are other folks at Claris going to be talking about this stuff?
I think that I'm really excited. We're going to have another live stream on July 11th. We'll be having a panel of developers. We'll be talking a little bit more about. We'll give people some time to play around with these things and really talk about how they're currently using. How are you guys using it out in the field? Let us know how you're leveraging semantic search inside of FileMaker, what type of applications you're using, really how is it changing, and what is it enabling you to do that you couldn't do before? Because I really think that's the thing, right? This is really opening the door to do things that we just couldn't do before as developers, right? As FileMaker developers, or were fairly difficult to do in FileMaker before.
That's huge.
That's really
that's
fantastic.
A community. That's a community live, just to be clear.
Yeah, community live stream.
A new series. We mentioned that there was already two community lives. One was showing a modification of one of your demo files for semantic search. So that one I think is an important one to go check out. Find that one on FileMaker or Claris community somewhere. I also did one with Rosemary that followed that just a couple weeks
You
ago,
look
which was
familiar.
about
Yeah.
basic prompting principles. And I focused on not only prompting principles and techniques, but also how you use your data in there as well. So those are not only useful when you're interacting with chatbots, but also with the script steps that we're talking about here as well, too, as you're putting your prompts together. The next one then, actually, I think there's another one that's on a non-AI topic, but the one to follow that is going to be related to what you're talking about. And I'll just, I just want to say thank you to everybody who helped vote me in for the Summerfest Tech conference. I will be speaking at Summerfest Tech on June 26th in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm really excited about that as a native Milwaukeean. I will be speaking on a updated version of my AI Deployed, where I'm showing a bunch of cool use cases of what people are actually using AI for out in the wild. Some of them are semantic search, but some of them are just kind of mind-blowing multimodal inputs. And then finally, all of us were on a conversation. This is just a plug. We don't have to rabbit hole into this, but we were all on a conversation together the last time where we were talking about this Claris AI learning initiative, which we have now dubbed, Matt is giving me the business on this, but as ClarisTalk. And so when you hear the term, when you hear ClarisTalk, it's supposed to bring a smile to your face, but also that is the working title. In the show notes will be an open invite to our Discord channel where we are going to move the conversation and talk about next steps. So I encourage everybody to go check that out. Matt, where are you and what are your plugs and where can people find you? Maybe even later today.
Yeah, if you're in Berlin at the conference, well, it's 7 p.m. here, so dinner time for me. But there's one more day left in the .fmp conference. Let's see, and I've got, what other plugs do I have? They're kind of far off, right? The next two conferences in Europe are October and November. So who knows what's going to evolve between now and
you
then.
have plenty of time to redo your search tool and
Yes,
speak on using semantic search. I'm Ronnie. I'm trying to put Matt on the spot.
Well, actually, I took your advice of putting me on the spot, and I am going to be speaking on semantic search. Yeah, at those conferences. And I'm also doing training classes. So I guess I do have a couple plugs. I'm doing a training class before each of those conferences the day before. So well, we might change the agenda a little bit, but basically on a lot of the best practices, advanced JSON stuff, and semantic search integration.
Oh, nice.
And then I also have my the full class again starting in early August. The FileMaker Champion class to help really take people who are internal developers and champion the use of FileMaker but don't have a ton of dev, or they have some dev and they want to like get up to speed. Yeah, I love that class. It's very hands-on, very tutorial based, and it's going to be even more AI focused in terms of actually the teaching. I'm going to be using yeah, I guess, well, I'm stop and back myself up a little bit. You and I talked about a book recently from Salman Khan, which we got the title wrong. It's actually Brave New Words. And he's talking about his use of ChatGPT as a teaching assistant, really as kind of a private tutor. Yeah, conmigo. Yeah, which is a play on Spanish, conmigo.
Yep. And anyway, his name, Khan. And well, and also Khan. we talked about that in the ClarisTalk. We were talking about the new era of learning is to have this guide on the side, and never has that been more realistic or possible than now with AI tutoring. And I literally just taught a class, a private FileMaker class this week. And when I got to the point where I said, well, have you guys used ChatGPT before as a guide on the side? Even though we hadn't raised the latent intelligence, which is what the ClarisTalk initiative is all about, even at whatever accuracy it had, the way that these new learners reacted to this, like literally the hope and relief in their face that they have this tool 24/7, and also that I didn't have to give them my cell phone number for them to text these same questions to me. And by the way, I will tell you, just as a, I didn't mention this before, but I taught a similar private class like 3 years ago. And the guys who set up the class were texting me. And then for like a year, they were texting me questions about FileMaker. And I'm happy to do that. But then the next year I came back to do a follow-up class, and I revealed to them what I had done is actually taken every question they asked me about FileMaker in the text message thread and fed it into ChatGPT and then responded
Wow.
to them. So what they realized is for about a year, they were actually getting guidance that they thought was for me, but from ChatGPT, and they believed it. So that's our Turing test on whether or not you
Yeah.
can use these tools. So the other part we'll say is that we're recording this on Friday, June 7th or something like that, little peek behind the curtain. But I say that because on Monday, do not forget WWDC. It's 10 o'clock a.m. on the Pacific Coast. I definitely think that people in our community should be tuning in for that. Ronnie's not going to make any comments, but he agrees with that too. And we, in our next podcast, we will likely be alluding to not only more discussion on the new Claris AI topics, but maybe how there's some delta with some of the stuff that we're going to hear from Apple on Monday as well too. So definitely tune in for that on Monday
Awesome.
morning.
So much happening so fast, and I'm loving all of it. All right,
Amen.
Ronnie, thanks again so much for joining.
And one last tease.
One
We'll
more
see
plug?
Ronnie again. We'll see Ronnie again in July. Sorry.
July.
We're going to come back and have some fun with Ronnie next time around. So you guys will see Ronnie again. Ronnie, thanks so much for showing up here.
It'll
Really
be
appreciate
nerdy
it.
and awesome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
All right.
This is fantastic.
All
Thanks,
right.
everyone.
See you guys.